Hello, siblings and cousins. Welcome to another edition of I Got a Lot of Things to Say. I'm your host, Kia Dotson, and I'm here with my two co hosts, Brandon and Geronimo, and our guest, Christopher Colt. Christopher is a journalist, and tonight we're going to be getting a little bit to his background as a journalist, but we're also going to be talking about Trump supporters and how Trump is viewed in the media, because I think that's a really important thing to talk about. How the media kind of portrays Trump versus how they portray Biden or Harris. So, Christopher, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you for coming on the show. So, just tell our listeners a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah, well, first I should correct that I'm a recovering journalist. I now work.
My bad.
No, I spent about 18 years as a journalist. I started in radio at a station in Portland, Oregon. Worked there in various capacities for about 14 years. Did a short stint at a TV station just doing assignment desk stuff. And then did writing for about three and a half years for a local publication a little closer to home before making the transition to the public relations sphere. As I said, I decided to leave a field where people were angry and go to a field where people were angry, but I didn't have to talk to them if I didn't want to. So yeah, short form journalism or audio style journalism, but some long form stuff in there as well. And now I am safely on the other side.
Cool. So, to get started, tell us about pretty much where you were politically in 2016.
Right. So, a little background. I come from a fairly large family. I'm the second oldest of 8 kids. A very conservative Christian family. So we were homeschooled, old style homeschool, not the new style, like homeschool co-op stuff that you see nowadays. This was old school, living in the country type of homeschooling. And so, you are raised in an environment where, I think the best way that I can put it is you're not exposed to a lot of the world. So what I found interesting as I kind of got out into my own, grew up, became an adult, started working in journalism, you start to talk to people and you realize that a lot of the sort of, what's the word I want to use, but the stereotypes, I guess, that you are painted of liberals or, people in the LGBTQ community or whatever, they start to fall apart when you actually talk to people and you hear their stories. I will say one of the things that I first noticed, because by 2016, I was definitely in a place where I was, I think, starting to understand that I clearly wasn't right on, like I had a couple of bosses who were lesbian, and I was like, no, they're just normal people. They're just normal individuals. You start to get this sense of like every lesbian is a militant person that, and most of them are just like, no, I'd rather just kind of like live my life. And so you start to see those stereotypes fall apart. But I think what started bringing me there, and we'll get to the reason that I voted for Trump in 2016 in a second, but one of the first things that I did when I started at the radio station was I interned with a local talk show host who was extremely conservative. I don't want to name him and throw him under the bus, but one of my jobs was screening calls. He would say something, somebody would call and they would say, hey, you need to tell him that that's not correct because of X. So being young and ignorant, I would walk into the room and I would say, hey, somebody called and they said, you got that fact wrong because of X. And he would get upset and he would say, I don't want to hear it unless they want to come on the air. And that was something that was a little bit of a trigger where I went, wait a minute, like I can verify that what that person said is true and that you are wrong, but you're telling me that you don't want to be corrected. You don't want to correct yourself. So I started to see this. That was the first time that I think I really was exposed to that mindset of like, no, I'm right, they're wrong. I don't want to hear anything else. Years later, I think politically, I was at a place where I, in 2016, kind of let myself be sold the bill of goods about Hillary's emails and feeling that, man, I don't know if I can trust her. I also was at a place where I was like, maybe we do need to shake things up. maybe there does need to be this concept of somebody that's a little bit outside of the political norms. And like I said before we started recording, like a lot of people, let myself believe that, well, maybe these more blustery tendencies will be, maybe the sharper edges will be worn off by the gravity of the job. I would say it was about 6 months into his presidency that I finally realized, no, that's not happening. And then the COVID pandemic happened, and that was really what I think put me over the edge when I started to see, as a journalist at that time, digging into the stories and seeing the things that were being put forward in the conspiracy community, then being parroted from the highest office in the land, and realizing, like, holy crap, I've supported somebody who is listening to the worst of the worst, who is not listening to the medical professionals, who's not listening to the people that are telling him how things should actually be. And that was really the point at which I started to really dig deep into some of the people that I'd been listening to. I started looking for alternative points of view. And what I really realized is that I thought I'd been doing the research, but I hadn't actually been digging beyond. And you start to see examples of, one example that really jumps out at me was Stephen Crowder, where he would talk about climate change and he would show these graphs. And then when you went and pulled up the graphs, you would realize that he had zoomed into a specific selection of it. And if you actually went to the primary source, you could zoom out and see he's misrepresenting the information. He's not giving you the whole story, and he's using that bit of information to try and spin a narrative that doesn't match when you go. And it was those kinds of things where I just slowly started to pay attention. And I think one thing that a lot of Trump supporters currently do. I had a conversation with one just recently, and I asked about the Arlington Cemetery thing and signing the flag. And their response was, well, that's sort of a Rorschach test. I mean, like if you saw Biden check his watch at the dignified transfer of the 13 victims of the suicide bombing outside of the Bagram base in Afghanistan, you would say that was, and my response was, what you're doing is you are focusing on a single thing at a time instead of backing up and looking at the picture as a whole. And that's what I started trying to do, is back up and look at the picture as a whole and look at the conversation that was happening on one side and then the other, and try and figure out who's giving the best representation of the truth. And so certainly by the time 2020 rolled around, I was like, no. But I will admit that in 2020, I didn't vote for either. Now, I happen to live in a state where I knew what the results were going to be, but I was still in this place where, especially the pro-life side of things, and that is such a strong thing when you're raised in, a very evangelical fundamentalist family. And so even then, I was like, man, I don't like Trump. I can't support Trump. Certainly after January 6th, I really couldn't. And after January 6th was the point at which I went, I am very upset at myself that I didn't take a stand in that election, whether it mattered or not. I'm in a state that I know is going to go blue. That was the excuse that I gave myself at that point. So really from that point until now has just been kind of a reckoning with digging deep into and starting to take every single one of those preconceptions that I was raised with and take them apart and try to dig into data that's not partisan and look at each one of those things. We can get into more of those if you want, but that was really the journey for me. You can rake me over the coals if you want at this point of the reasons that I made those decisions, but that's, as I look back on it, kind of the journey that brought me to where I am now.
I personally don't believe in crying over spilt milk. You know what I mean? So I don't think there'll be any raking of the coals.
It's okay. I'll do my penance.
You know what I mean? We are but sums of our life experience, right? And, when you're younger, you tend to do things like your parents. I certainly do that. I'm a Democrat because my parents are. Well, that's how I started, but that's not why I'm a Democrat anymore. And I would even say that I've moved further left. I'm a registered Democrat because we only have two political parties, but I've moved further left as I've gotten older. And that was because I did a lot of kind of like what you did. I did a lot of learning and I did a lot of research, and I said, this is what I believe, and this is what I think should happen, and this is how I feel our government should run. So it's not so much, raking you over the coals for stuff that you did in 2016. 2016. I don't really get upset if someone said, I get a little upset when someone said they voted for Trump in 2016. I'm just going to be honest. I do get a little upset. And I think the reason I get a little upset is I think Black people, especially Black people in New York City, already knew what he was about. And I think that there were a lot of Black people in 2026 who were sounding the alarm and saying, yo, you do not want this person as president. Like, he's not what you think he is. He's done this, he's done that. I knew about the Central Park 5 thing when it happened. I was young, but I remember it. And I also remember him taking out that ad. And I wasn't in New York City, I was in Washington, D.C. And so for me, Trump has always been someone that wasn't for Black people. So as a Black person, I definitely was not going to vote for him. But he was coming right off The Apprentice. We have a thing where our society kind of puts celebrities on a pedestal. We are encouraged as a society to form parasocial relationships with celebrities, thinking that we know them. And what better way to feel that parasocial relationship is with a reality show. And the reality show showed him as this very competent, this very successful, savvy business person when none of that was true. And so I kind of get people are tired of the establishment. They were tired of the same old, same old. I mean, it was Clinton who had been a first lady and Secretary of State, and then this new guy. And I think people were like, I'm just kind of sick of it. And they saw Hillary as an elite liberal, and they saw Trump as you're fired. And so I think that kind of resonated with people. How many people want to be a business savvy billionaire? And that's kind of how they played him up. Okay, we're going to vote for him. While I'm upset, I understand and I give grace because none of us knew. And like you said before, we started taping. I don't think anyone truly knew what we were getting into when he became president. And as those 4 years went on, we kind of realized this man has no idea what the hell he's doing. He doesn't seem very smart or business savvy. It seems like he is literally just raw dogging being the president, doing it half-assed, doing it very lazy. And then a lot of people around him were kind of the same way. The people he were listening to, his advisors, were just as half-assed and just as incompetent as he was, except they were a little bit smarter than him. And so 2020 rolls around, and then we get a pandemic, which he completely bumbled. I think the only thing he didn't bumble was fast tracking the vaccine, but he kind of bumbled everything else. All of these people died. We had millions of people that died. And my thing was, okay, whoever is voting for him in 2020, we've already had 4 years of this, and this was a shit show. Like, internationally, all of the politicians were looking at us like, is this the powerful United States? They voted for this dude? What the hell? So, 2020, you're still voting for him. I'm not going to have grace for you anymore because we have 4 years and you know what he's about and you still want to deal with this. That's my thing.
Yeah, I agree with basically all of that. Christopher, thanks so much for coming on. I always enjoy our interactions online. And I don't think there's any value in raking you across the coals. There might be if you were still a Trump supporter, and I would definitely jump at the opportunity to do that. But you're not. What I find a lot more valuable is getting your perspective and how we can reach voters. And so I do have a question. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sweet. So I heard you reference a little bit of disillusionment with like Hillary Clinton, the emails, all of that. And so, you've mentioned like making a clean break away from, for lack of a better term, the cult of Trumpism, right? And I heard you reference the media that you were intaking and the role that misinformation and conspiracy theories played in that, decision. But how do you guard against those now?
I think the primary way is just developing a system for understanding what sort of information is trustworthy and what isn't. Prior to 2016, I don't think that I had established a way to understand the veracity of certain sources of information, and I think that the piece of advice that I give to people now is, and I think this is important because, as we all know, you can't bludgeon people over the head and bring them to any sort of conclusion that you would like. But you can certainly ask them questions. And one of the questions that I generally ask is, what is your process for determining what information is trustworthy and what isn't? And don't say, if I like it, it's trustworthy, and if I don't, it's not. You have to have a process. And my process is generally, I look at the history of the source. What is their, do they generally tend to only post things that are positive about one side or one person or the other? Those sorts of things. So where I would say that I messed up in 2016 is, now you have to remember, growing up for years with Rush Limbaugh on the radio in your house, or Glenn Beck, and hearing all of these rumors about the Clinton crime family, the crooked, and all these things.
Sure.
And how much that gets ingrained. Not that I believed that Hillary Clinton was evil, or that I didn't believe the Pizzagate stuff, none of that. That was crazy. But, you get to a point where you go, man, there's all this smoke. There's got to be some fire, not realizing that the smoke is there literally just to create the impression that there might be a fire.
Right.
And if I had had a system at that time of being able to know who my trusted sources are and being able to understand what sources of information could be verified, I think I would have had a better sense at that time of the realization that there was a significant effort on the part of propagandists to put information out there to create the impression that there was something nefarious going on the part of Hillary Clinton or the Clintons in general. So, I mean, that's kind of what has changed now is that I have developed that system for being able to understand what information makes sense and what doesn't.
Thank you. So important. I appreciate that. Given that Trumpism still has a hold on, a good portion of the country, how do you recommend engaging maybe your former peers or current peers that still align with those beliefs, or I won't even say beliefs, just this ideology that he's the best route forward?
Yeah, I would say that, first of all, pearls before swine is a phrase that I use a lot.
I know exactly what. Yeah, my father was a minister. I heard it my whole life.
I think that you have to start from that place of going, okay, is this person receptive to anything? Or are they so deep down the rabbit hole and so deep in the cult that anything I say, they're just going to take and discard? Why would I waste my time with that? At this point, I would say I probably have 3 people in my immediate circle that will even entertain, that are Trump supporters, that will even allow a conversation. And so for them, my process that I hope will be successful in time has simply been to ask them questions and say, well, what do you think of this thing that he said? What do you think of this thing? And in the hopes that over time, you can build up in them what I realized, which is, like I said before, you have to back up. You can't get so close to the picture that you become fixated on one element of it. You have to back up in terms of his relationship with the military. You have to back up. It's not just Arlington. It's not just the comments about suckers and losers. Like, there's a whole history starting with the 5 draft deferments all the way down that you have to look at and weigh that against his words. And this is what I tell people all the time. There's what he says. For instance, I won't touch Social Security or Medicare. And there's what he does, which is every time he put forward a budget in his 4 years as president, included cuts to Social Security and Medicare. So what you ask them is, do you believe what he's saying, or you believe what he's doing? Do you believe he's pro-life because he helped to put in, if pro-life is their thing? My attack with him has been, okay, tell me in what way he is pro-life. Because he says we know that he's paid for abortions. Have a clip of him talking to Howard Stern, talking about he was disappointed that one of his former wives decided to have the baby when she got pregnant.
Right.
which I think ended up being Tiffany, right? So,
right.
We have these, like, you have to, and the problem I think is that by and large, the experience I have is they tend to give you a certain amount of leash and then they just close the door. And I'm not the kind of person that's going to stand there and kick out the door once it's closed. You just have to hope that you've planted enough of a seed where over time it'll come back to them and be like, I let him off the hook for that one. I let him off the hook for the fine people on both sides thing because I bought the line that was taken out of context. But how do I let him off the hook for not coming out against bomb threats in Springfield or for calling immigrants vermin and using Nazi-ish comments about them? Like, you have to kind of be able to sort of get them to find the answer on their own. I know that was what was most useful for me, was the people that said, yeah, I hear that, but have you considered this? Or what do you think about this? Rather than, you're so dumb for believing that. I have no problem with attacking trolls on threads or whatever. People that I know are clearly not receptive to feedback. It's a little fun sometimes to play with them.
Right.
But, in terms of the people that are reachable, and I think there are a few of them, it really just has to come down to the good liars when they go out to the Trump rallies and they always ask the question, would you rather have 4 years of a President Kamala Harris or forever of a dictator Trump? The people that say dictator Trump, they're not reachable. You cannot get through that. You just can't. Right. That's the swine, and you don't cast your pearls there. But everybody else, I think, and I've said this before on threads, like, fun is fun, but understand that you have to, like, if you have a loved one that is in the Trump cult, my parents are in that. We don't talk politics, but we maintain a relationship. And I understand the people who are like, I couldn't have that sort of toxicity around me. I couldn't deal with people because they're evil, they're wrong. I get where that's coming from. But my take on it is, you have to be able to maintain that bridge so that when the fever breaks, and I believe it will at some point, that they know that they're not going to be ostracized if they admit, I screwed up, I had it wrong, and I hope you'll forgive me. And that's what, my parents are getting older, but I still hold out hope that someday we can have that conversation where they go, hey, I see it now. Like, my dad and I have had conversations, and what I constantly tell him is, Dad, I'm not asking you to become a Democrat. I'm simply asking you to put your country over your party.
Sure.
And my hope is that eventually Trump does enough dumb shit that maybe, just maybe, they go, okay, I'm just not voting for him. I'm not asking you to vote for Kamala Harris. I'm asking you to withhold your support from Donald Trump, because for them, that matters. That might just be the furthest I can get them.
And to just jump in, and I'm asking Geronimo this. There is a couple of things. You keep a relationship with your family, even though they are Trump supporters. And I don't know if I could do that, but I also realize that I don't have to do that too. And so when you don't have to do that, like, I don't know anyone in my immediate family that's a Trump supporter. If I have Trump supporters in my family, it's probably my third cousin. And yeah, y'all, I got 23 cousins. I got them that far back. My mom's the youngest of 10, and my dad's the second oldest of 6. So I got a lot of cousins. None of my aunts and uncles are Trump supporters. Like, I don't have Trump supporters in my family.
You're so lucky.
And, I asked Geronimo, to jump in on this because I think it's because I'm Black. Not to say that there aren't Black Trump supporters. There are. But I feel like, depending on your location, I'm in the DMV. I'm in Washington, D.C. We are very blue. Maryland was red at one point. They had a Republican governor, but we have a Democratic governor now. And Maryland is usually blue. Virginia has historically kind of been a toss-up. Sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's not. They have a blue legislature, but they don't have a blue governor. And Geronimo, you're in Wisconsin, right?
Yes, unfortunately.
So, and I do think that it can partly be where you're from, but, as a Black person, I don't know any Trump supporters. I don't know if my friends' family members have Trump supporters, because it's either never talked about. It's always, oh, I'm voting for Harris. We don't even go to rallies or anything because it's just like we're voting. This is the person we're voting for because we've historically been, a Democrat. Geronimo, is that your lived experience?
I think with me is just like my politics are just a little bit more radical than my family. So it's kind of like, I think they don't like to discuss politics with me because I'm very no holds barred and I'm very like, yeah, like there's nothing that you can convince me to think that if you're voting for or against your interest, that I look at people like a shitty person. Like, and I admit that. And I say that only because it's just like, there's nothing that there's no viable reason or viable justification that you can give me just based off of his personality alone and the things that he said that you could sit there and make sense of why you would vote for him as a black person. And it's funny because it's just like people are like, well, you should be able to agree to disagree. I'm like, yeah, if pineapple goes on pizza, absolutely. Like, I'm not about to agree to disagree on a person who has galvanized so many people to believe that they're entitled to certain things in such a way at the detriment of other people. I don't vibe with that. So it's really hard for me to hear people say, oh, well, I can agree to disagree with people. And I'm just like, how? Why? And obviously everybody's circumstance is different, and I try to keep that in mind. It's just that when you're talking about the lives of how people have to navigate around this, like I don't have the luxury to agree to disagree because it's like I'm affected by people who think like that or act like that on a regular basis. So if that's the case, you got to keep 50 feet away from me at all times because I'm liable to sound off. And I don't care if your feelings get it. In regards to, people like Christopher who has seen certain things and now has changed his mind, I feel like to his point, there are a lot of people who are Trump supporters who may be on the fence. And it's like, what's the ETA though for you to get over the fence?
Right.
Like, what's the timeline we talking here? Because it's just like, how long are you going to sit there and play both sides till you realize, yo, this is, even you playing both sides is harmful and detrimental. And that's the question that I would ask people. It's like, how long do we wait for them to pick a side or pick and to your point, Christopher, you don't have to choose Kamala. You don't. But you can withdraw your support from this person who has basically shown he is a terrible person. Even just if you remove the politics aside, he's a terrible person. How can you in your right mind look at this person, the things that he says, things that he represents, and say, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to cast my vote for this guy? It's like, make that make sense to me, because it doesn't. And so I think in my experience, I try my best to grant clemency, but I have a very hard time with it because it's just like, I think about everybody that's affected. And when that comes into play, it's hard for me to look at somebody who is just downright saying, oh, I'm voting for Trump, and not look at them like, I don't trust you. There's a trust factor that comes into play for me. Like, I don't trust you. I don't trust you with my life or the life of anybody else at this point, because you are putting what exactly over the rights and privileges and safety and autonomy of millions of people who have to navigate people like you on a regular basis. So it does strike me as, a little cold sometimes when people think like that. But I also try to think about, not everybody thinks as radically or as off the grid as I do. So I have to keep that in mind, because I'm definitely like, what? Seriously? Okay. But Christopher, when you explained it, it's like particularly your parents and your relationship with your parents, and you're hoping that something will get them to a point where they can see what he's doing and say, you know what? I don't think I can align with that. You're holding out hope, and that's very admirable of you. I think that a lot of people are in your shoe. I think on both sides. I think there are progressives and liberals who have family members who are trying to hold out hope that they can convince their loved ones to at least withdraw their support. And they're just really hoping that at some point that my cousin, my sister, my brother, my dad, like, will somehow see this and say, you know what, I can't align with this anymore. But my question would be, what's the ETA?
Yeah. No, I think that's, you make fantastic points. I wonder sometimes, I happen to live in a state that I know is going to be about 73% Democrat in the election. It's a safe blue state. And I wonder sometimes how much my relationship with them would be different if we lived in Pennsylvania or Nevada or Arizona or a swing state that things are going to be razor thin. Would I be a little bit more like, hey, I need you to tell me why you're voting for this guy. And I need you to make it clear based on solid evidence, not feelings. One of the last, my dad and I, at his request, don't talk politics anymore. What I find fascinating is that his reasoning was, I can't keep up with your reporter brain. Meaning, I can respond to things. I can dig down and I can find the flaw in the things that he sends me and illustrate it to him. What I find interesting is that the decision was not, hey, Chris is pretty smart. He does a pretty good job of breaking things down. Why don't I use him as a source to suss out whether something is legitimate or not? That was not the conclusion that was reached. The conclusion that was reached was, let's just not talk politics. And I find that fascinating because it says something about the psychology of some Trump supporters.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Continue.
Yeah, well,
Me too, because I wanted to touch.
Just say on it.
I'm glad he brought it up too, because I also wanted to touch on the psychology part of the Trump supporter. But Chris, continue with your point.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm glad to let you guys jump in and segment. Like, there was an interaction that I had sometime early on in the pandemic, and it wasn't related to the pandemic, but it was early on in that time when you were starting to see a lot of people that you otherwise knew very little about their political persuasion starting to post things that you looked at and went, what? And this was during, I don't know if you guys remember, sort of the panic that bubbled up around kids being abducted, the Save the Children movement. And you would see these videos get posted online of, somebody grabbing a kid trying to take off with them. And this particular post had to do with one of those videos, but when you looked into it, what you realized was that the person who grabbed the kid was having a schizophrenic episode, and they thought the child was theirs, and they thought they were rescuing the child from a stranger. It was posted, though, as if this were an example of some child sex trafficking abduction. And so I responded and said, hey, I appreciate you posting this. Always good to be aware, but here's the reality of this. And I don't think that it's necessary to post things that are not accurate, because all you end up doing is creating fear. And the response was one of the most honest and most sad things that I've ever heard. And it stuck with me. And they said, Chris, I don't even want to share anything with you anymore because you'll just debunk it. You take that step back mentally, right?
Right.
And you go, wait a minute, if it's wrong, wouldn't you want to know that it's wrong? And in that moment, I realized that the psychology of people who embrace Donald Trump has to have some element of, I don't want to have my narrative bubble poked.
Well, yeah, it's an alternate reality. Right. They live in an alternate reality. And, I think we do ourselves and what we want to be the prevailing opinion in solving this when we don't bring up the cult-like nature of Trumpism and not connect it to the cult-like nature of religious upbringing.
Yeah.
We can list off, the parallels between Trumpism and cultism, unquestioning loyalty to a leader, demonization of dissenters. I wouldn't call Trump charismatic, but his people do, right? He's their charismatic leader. They have reliance on emotional appeals over rational arguments, right? Their misinformation and alternate realities, and this persecution complex and a manipulation of identity and isolation. They isolate themselves. And I just feel we do a big disservice to the electorate as a whole when talking about ridding ourselves of this if we don't make those connections.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. It's so interesting. I recall when my dad made the comment about, for the sake of our relationship, I don't think we should talk politics anymore. And I remember my response was, I think that says a lot about your view of me. Because at no point in any of the back and forths that we've had that have sometimes gotten pretty heated, at no point have I ever thought to myself, well, crap, I just don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. I don't want my kids coming over to your house. And, not once, not once. And the fact that you think that we can't have, the fact that you're worried you won't be able to maintain the relationship because of this disagreement over politics tells me more about you than it says about your political view, to be honest.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I take into account, I say that's true for straight white people in America, right? But to, Geronimo's point, there are a subsect of people who could not have anything to do with your father, and likely so. Those people people like your father carry those same, thoughts toward any dissension, right? I know that, to Geronimo's point, I know for me, and I'm like Kia, my whole family's Democratic. My story's a tad bit different, and I grew up with Christian ministers, but they were Democrats. So I never grew up with these right-wing talking points being sold to me as truth, right? And so I don't have family today that is Trump supporters, but I've had to reconcile it with friends. And I know that's a lot easier, but I do hold the opinion that at some point there is going to have to come a time where people do ostracize themselves from their families if they choose not to come out of the fog. I do believe it's if we look at Germany, how they ridded themselves of Nazism. I mean, there were laws that were created and they ostracized those people. And I'm not saying your dad's a Nazi. Please don't take that. please don't think that. I know from what you've described, I know your dad's type. I know he's a wholesome person for the most part, right? But those uncomfortable moments of saying like, hey, I can't align with you anymore. I'm very sorry. Those conversations are going to have to happen more, I think, before these people are going to wake up, right?
I mean, well,
they're your parents. How old are they? They're probably in their 70s and 80s. I mean, what's the use? You know?
Well, there's an element of that too, and he's even made that comment. He's basically said, "Hey, I'm too old," And okay, there is an element of truth to that, right? I'm in my mid 70s. I'm retired. I don't know how much longer I have. I don't want this stress. I don't want to think about it. The last conversation was, we've decided, your mother and I, that we don't want to talk politics anymore. And I said, so you're not talking politics with each other, or you're just not talking politics with people who disagree with you? No comment. It's like, so no, you're not giving up politics. You're just withdrawing into your bubble so that you can feel safe and secure and justified in your hatred and anger. You're looking at it as if it's going to be a painful process to change, which, I mean, I think to me what that said, if I was going to read between the lines, which is probably not safe, but if I was going to, I would say there's a crack there, right? Like, I think what he's telling me is, I'm susceptible to what you're saying, but I know it's going to be a long, painful process of deconstructing that, and I'm not ready for that at this stage.
Well, that's exactly what he's saying. I mean, when we hear information that is contrary to our world belief or our world view, one of two things happen. We enter a fight and flight response, right? I mean, again, the psychology piece of it, right? Like, there's a fight and flight response. And so you either choose to argue or you choose to just walk away from it, right? And I think that's the sum of cognitive dissonance, right?
But I also think too, as someone who has gone through a tremendous amount of therapy, one of the things that I learned through trauma-informed therapy that I feel like Trump supporters could also use is the realization that it is okay to be wrong. You are not a bad person. It is okay to make a mistake. It is okay to be wrong. And it's not going to hurt your ego. You can walk away from this. I think what makes it really hard for these people to walk away from it, and something that we're going to be doing a series on, is that that's a community for them. And white people as a whole don't know how to build community because society taught you that it's rugged individualism. that it's you only care about the nuclear family. That's now a thing. Whereas before it wasn't. You care about your nuclear family and that's it. You don't care about anybody else. And so what MAGA and what Trump gave these people is a sense of community.
Right.
And in and of that can be a good thing.
Right.
Think about all the people who are in a rural area who the next person is, 2 miles down the road of people. Like where my family's from Southern Maryland. That's how you say down the road a piece is a long way away. That may be the only person you see. So you have this whole online community and you're getting validated and you're getting seen. And then why would you want to give that up? Like, yeah, I get it. You actually may be right. But look at all the things that I'm going to lose. And there's no guarantee I'm going to get that same thing if I now start agreeing with you.
Right. Well, and that's so true, right? And I know that it's very, very hard. I have an experience leaving a Colt, a few years ago. That is the one thing that I said that they did really well, right? They do community really well. And we can say the same. I don't want to spend too much time praising the cult of Trump, but when they get together, they're happy with each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're around, they're enjoying each other's company, whether we like the fact that they're talking about how horrible gays and Mexicans and blacks are, right? Like they're communing with each other. Right. And they're building a community. And I'm sure, one Trump supporter to another. I've never studied, deep the sociology of it, but I'm sure that if they called one another and needed something, they would show up for one another. You know what I mean?
You hear that a lot from folks that are there, where they say, "Hey, these even people who go to Trump rallies to illustrate the absurdity of it will often say." These people are generally pretty nice individuals. If you're talking to them off camera, they have, but I think to your point, Brandon, that's part of what makes the lies that Trump tells so potent. Because when you have this community of people who are only talking to each other, right? Trump says something that to you or Kia or Geronimo or to me sounds utterly fantastical and disconnected from reality. When it is repeated back and forth in these little communities, it takes on a life of its own, right? Because if you hear that lie from Trump, you might go, whatever. But if you hear stolen election from 50 of your closest friends, and they're all sharing the latest video and stuff, there's a reinforcement that happens inside that echo chamber that continues to build this mythology to the point where Trump has gaslit them into thinking that everything they see that is negative about him is a fabricated myth, whereas everything that he says is reality and truth. And the human brain, after it's exposed to that for a while, will just accept it as reality and build whatever construct it needs to prop that up. So where you and I have these conversations with Trump supporters and go, dude, none of that makes sense. As a survival mechanism, they've built the reality that they need. I remember ages ago watching a documentary where they were examining the brain. And one of the things that they brought up was that our brain is not able to fully process visual data. So what it does is it interpolates with experience. So if you and I walk through the same city, we would take it in slightly differently because we're taking in a certain amount of visual data, and then our experience of what a city is supposed to be is what our brain uses to interpolate and fill in those gaps in the visual data. And so that explains a little bit of what's happening, I think, with the average Trump supporter, or maybe even the blue MAGA folks, right? We all have experienced a few of those folks who just believe that, something else unreal. But I think their brain is able to just construct a reality that supports what they've accepted as true. And then they have this community of reinforcement that continues to echo back and forth until it becomes the truth. to them. I mean, I had a discussion with somebody today that was trying to argue that the free speech protects the media, and nothing they were saying made sense with the information they were showing me to try and prove what they were saying. But to them, it was reality.
It made 100% sense. Yeah. I mean, it's jumping back to living in those alternate realities. And, I think a phrase that we haven't heard in a really long time is alternate facts, right? That was a hallmark phrase of the Trump administration. It was hallmark or alternative facts. And so they have a list of alternative facts in the same way that we have, lists of Kamala's accomplishments and all of the things that, we're doing that or that she's done. They have those lists as well. So where do you feel the media right now is a lie in the democratic process? I know that the prevailing opinion on Threads is that, we stopped watching mainstream media and there's no really hope. But do you think there's hope?
Well, I would say, and this is my theory, that, based on, now, obviously, I haven't worked in, I have worked tangentially with CBS News radio in some capacity, but most of my experience has been at the local level. And I started thinking about it because for a long time, I've defended the process, right? Like no one, especially, this is predominantly against the right, the concept on the right that the media is fully biased against Trump, that it's part of a conspiracy to put forward negative stories about Trump and MAGA. And I've long defended the media against that because I said, hey, I've been in a lot of meetings. I've sat through a lot of planning sessions and a lot of editorial meetings. And I can guarantee you at no point is anybody saying, okay, well, how can we bash Trump today and make, at the time Hillary look good or make Kamala look good? But as I started thinking more about my experiences in those meetings, what became plain was that what we're dealing with is a market-driven information system. And so we have, when you're sitting in those meetings, the conversation will often go, everybody brings in a list, right? They've got their idea of like, I think this could be a story, this could be a story. And then the discussion goes, okay, yeah, that's worth pursuing, go do that. No, that's, and usually you had a couple of different things that you would ask. How many people does it affect? How easy is it to gather the information in time for deadlines? You look at those sort of logistical things, but over time, your number one driving motivator is what story will be of the greatest importance to the listener. Right. And that's not necessarily always predicated on which story is the most true to life.
Right.
It's predicated on which stories will get people to keep listening to the radio station or keep watching the television or keep reading the article. And over time, I think that creates an incentive structure, which we see a lot of times in the content creator space, right? The incentive structure is where's the money? Kind of follow the money. There was a YouTuber, I don't know if you guys are familiar, his name is John Campbell. And he's a doctor, nurse practitioner, whatever. And early on in the pandemic, great source of information. Because he wasn't technical, you could understand what he was saying. He was very, based in fact. And then all of a sudden, the vaccines came out, and you notice a trend where he did one video that sort of gave a little bit of oxygen to some of the conspiracy theories around vaccine injuries, and it got more views and got shared more widely than his other videos. And then he went back to his normal, just every day, here's an update type of thing. And then all of a sudden, here's another one about another vaccine injury story. And now that's all he does. And so I can go back and look at his history and make the assumption that whether he intended to or not, he was like the mouse pushing the button, right? Cheese came out that time. All right, I'm gonna push that button again. More cheese, And I think that while that's an extreme example of somebody who fell into a conspiracy rabbit hole, either intentionally or because just as a Pavlovian thing, like he got rewarded for spreading a certain sort of information and then became misinformation, and now he's much bigger than he used to be. He makes a lot more money, but he's now stuck, right? He's burned his bridges to the medical community. He's burned his bridges to being able to escape from the misinformation hole, because if he starts admitting that he's spreading misinformation, guess what? He gets death threats and all his viewers go away. That's an extreme example, but I think on the corporate media side, we see a similar sort of incentive structure where I'm going to focus on what drives eyeballs and traffic. And at this moment, whether you're upset and you're clicking on a story because you're like, oh, what fresh hell is this? Or you like the story, there's an incentive structure for creating a narrative that causes consternation, So my theory is that it's not, I'm sure in some elements it may be, but overall, I don't think the incentive structure, I don't think the people that work in that business on an individual level have an intention of putting forward information that's not accurate or information that doesn't reflect reality. But as a corporate structure and as an incentive direction, you create an environment in which stories about, Kamala's the it girl right now. Well, let's take her down a peg. Trump is crazy all the time. It just gets exhausting. If we keep pointing that out, it's not worth anything. It was interesting because this morning, I don't know if you guys have ever watched the Some More News channel on YouTube. Their video this week was looking back at news stories from the past year and a half or so that were huge stories that sort of fizzled out, like the collapsing honeybee population, the murder hornets, stuff like that. And what I found interesting about that is it illustrated how much a story can be of the moment and then fade into the background. Not that any of the emergencies that were highlighted by those stories have gone away. We still have issues with a lack of pollinators and collapsing bee population. We still have, murder hornets are still a thing and still being discovered and still potentially spreading. All of those things are still issues. Massive wildfires, still issues. But we don't hear about them as much because the way the news business works, you can only focus on a subject so long before people get tired of it, get bored of it, and move on. So we are experiencing an incentive structure in the information space that needs to always be focusing on what's new, because what's new is what's interesting. Kamala Harris is new, and so her policy proposals and the things she says are of interest, right? So that's my take on it. I get a little frustrated because, yes, I absolutely agree with those who say mainstream media is failing us in the moment. But no, I don't necessarily agree that it's something that's done in a concerted way that is intended to hurt Kamala Harris and help Donald Trump. It certainly is when you're looking at Fox News or things like that. But even they follow their incentive structure, right? Fox News is in a place now where they cannot change because they will lose viewers, they will lose revenue, and they will collapse. They've built this system on the propaganda that they put forward.
Well, yeah, so much so they had to pay out $787 million.
Right.
Right.
And yet they were willing to do that and then continue doing the thing that they're doing, right? Because there's so much financial incentive for them that they can take that hit and then just keep right on rolling as a propaganda machine for the Republican Party.
Right.
So I think for some Trump supporters, there is never going to be a change of mind. There's just always going to be people that are going to be Trump supporters. And what I say to that is leave them on the side of the street, leave them on the curb. We're not going to harm them. We're going to vote in their best interest because usually, at least for me, what I vote for helps everybody. And I think as a voting bloc, Black people have voted in that way. It wasn't just, well, this is just going to help Black people. This is also going to help all these other people too. So when I vote, I think about those things. Am I voting for myself and my community, or is just for me? So for those Trump supporters, leave them on the side of the road. Our votes, what we vote for, will take care of them. They can scream Trump while they're getting, their free health care or their universal basic income or whatever. Let them scream. But for people who we think can change, what do people do? And I'm going to say that I don't think I'm going to be one of those people, because I'm with Geronimo with the, what is it about me, or what is it about Brandon, or what is it about Geronimo that somehow makes you, I don't know, wish ill will, because sometimes I feel that. I feel that Trump supporters really want bad things to happen to us. I've seen the comments. One guy on Threads was talking about, I hope you swing on trees. And I'm like, we're wishing lynching on each other now. Is that the new thing? Like, I don't want to talk to them and I don't want to bring them anywhere. So for the people who are willing to do it, because A, I do believe that is work that needs to be done, but B, I don't think it should be done at the expense of marginalized groups, which means let the other white people talk to the Trump people, but don't let it be the responsibility of me or Brandon or Geronimo to do it.
I don't think it's fair to expect that you guys need to be the one to reach those folks. First of all, a lot of them are going to be less receptive to you for obvious and abhorrent reasons. We all have our part to play in this. I think, the part that I've adopted is as the former Trump supporter, the guy who was raised deeply conservative and Christian and still maintains his faith, but looks at the world in a way that says, how should my faith inform how I view somebody like Donald Trump? So that's the tack that I take in the people that I'm able to reach and say, look, again, as I said before, I'm not necessarily asking you to vote for Kamala Harris. I'm asking you to sit this one out, if that's what it takes. If you can't bring yourself to vote for a Democrat for whatever reason, just sit this one out. But as a believer in Jesus Christ, how do you square that with somebody like Donald Trump? What was interesting is I've noticed that the narrative early on was, Trump's a Christian, he's pro-Christian, and he's going to bring Christianity back to America, right? And then as it became increasingly obvious that Trump is not a Christian, is not going to become a Christian, is never going to behave like a Christian, is never going to demonstrate any of the fruits of the Spirit, the narrative changed to, well, we don't elect a pastor, which I find fascinating, right?
Right.
Well, we just need somebody in the White House who will defend us, but he doesn't have to be of us. Like,
Right.
Okay, that's fine. Like, I appreciate that you are willing to accept the fact that the representative in the White House doesn't necessarily need to be a Christian to support Christianity, but you realize that you've moved the goalpost, right? Like Trump was supposed to be God's chosen one as a Christian. Now he's God's chosen one as a broken vessel that God can use.
Right.
And, you try to point out to them, like, you realize that what you've done is you've simply twisted scripture to find a way to rationalize your support of this man. You've said,
and it's a big twist.
Oh, it's a pretzel. I mean, it's
a huge twist. I mean, as someone who grew up Christian, went to Christian school, even did a year of Bible college, that the comparison of him to a Christian makes normal, anyone with knowledge of Christianity like myself and you kind of scoff at that. Right? Because, if you like Donald Trump's policies, that's one thing, but don't call him a Christian. Because that's just the biggest fallacy.
Well, the other side of that is, if you like his policies, could you please explain them to me? Because I can't figure them out.
Right. And that's a whole other thing. I mean, we found...
Well, you know this, Brandon. And Geronimo, you've probably experienced this too. If you have a conversation with a Trump supporter and you're able to parry all of their reasons for supporting him, what is the ultimate fallback? Well, he makes people like you mad, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah, that's it, right?
But usually,
I think at the end of the day, that's as deep as it gets.
But like the funny part about it is that when people say that to me, I was like, actually, he doesn't make me mad or care for him either way. It's just like, I feel like people that vote for him, like you, are stupid.
Right.
It's just like, hey, it's just like, what do they say to that? They have nothing for that.
They accuse you of name calling. They accuse you of, using attacks and attacking them. And I mean, it's gaslighting. And they don't even realize. I think the average Trump supporter, I don't view them as, necessarily highly intelligent people now, right? I know that the tent was a lot bigger a few years ago, and there were some really smart people who just thought Trump could do it. And that's okay, right? But the majority of his electorate base now are uneducated, poor white people, with the exception of a few very, very rich white people. who want his tax cuts. But the masses are, folks not living the same way all of us are, right? They're not, and I'm not even talking about material things. I'm talking about like what we're doing right now. People from all different backgrounds having conversations, knowing that they disagree on certain things, right? I mean, they're not doing that work. And I think that takes a large level of self-awareness and an ability to be humble. Now, I'm never a person that claims humility, because I think that's silly. You're not really humble if you say you are. But there is humility that comes with that self-awareness and being able to recognize you're wrong. Kia made a point not that long ago that there's this fear of admitting that you're wrong. And I think that that's the biggest piece of it, right? I mean, if you voted for Trump in 2016, you've been around for a decade almost, because he really started in 2015. So yeah, almost 10 years.
My estimation is that there's probably around 30% of Republicans that are pro-Trump. They love Trump. And I think the rest of them just fear Democrats more than they fear Trump.
Right.
Those are the people that I think there are maybe inroads. I don't, like you said, what's the ETA on that? We're now a month and a half out from election day, but I think that the hope there is also that I wonder how much those people are going to be motivated to show up on election day.
Yeah.
We all know the turnout election, right? Whichever side can motivate their base the most is going to have a strong advantage in this election.
Right. And, I think that there's going to be a large portion of people who don't show up. Right. I think that
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Sorry to jump in. Don't show up for who? For Trump?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a few people that don't show up for him as far as voting, right? I think that, more than likely probably people like that are a little bit not as resolute as Liz Cheney, right? Republicans like her may not even show up to vote for Kamala, but they're not going to vote for Trump either, right? And I think that's a win for us.
Yeah, I want to know, one thing I would love to ask, and maybe some pollsters on Threads can answer this question for us, but I would love to know a little bit more detail about the sorts of answers that pollsters are getting. Like when you ask, are you voting for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? If somebody says, well, I'm certainly not voting for Harris, is that counted as a Trump vote? Because I didn't hear you say I'm voting for Donald Trump. I would love to know that level of granularity. I don't know that we'll ever get it, but I'm curious.
I get polled once a month. I get polled regularly once a month by, what's the name of it? I can't think of the name right now. But since for the last 3 months, I've been getting polled via text message through another entity. And the questions are the same. It's, do I have a favorable view of candidates? It says, do you have or they ask me, are you registered to vote in the state of Arizona? They ask me, am I likely to vote? Or am I, what's my likelihood of voting? Am I probably going to vote, definitely going to vote, not going to vote, and then they start asking me favorability questions. Do I have a favorable or unfavorable view of Donald Trump, Katie Hobbs, since I'm in Arizona, Ruben Gallego, Carrie Lake, and Donald Trump and Kamala Harris? And then they ask if I voted for Donald Trump or, who I voted for in 2020. And those are the lines of questions I'm getting. I'm not getting any questions. I'm not getting polled on the questions like, who do you think is better for the economy?
I still can't believe the majority is Trump. Not after, hearing his comments.
I don't believe that the race is as close as they say it is. I think that they manipulate the polls so that, think about how, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist at all, but think about how connected the polls are to political fundraising and people tuning into the news, and clicking everything, So if they maintain that the race is really close, then, politicians can write their fundraising emails on that. And, content writers can, pine away at writing up articles, right?
Yeah, not to get into too deep an analysis of the data, but I wonder how much, I know for real people feel the pinch, right? I think Kamala has done a good job of acknowledging that, things are more expensive now than they used to be,
right?
But you need to look at where we're headed. For instance, grocery prices fell 3.7% in August, the steepest drop since they started tracking those numbers.
Right.
So point that out and say, look, things are coming back into line. If you go to the store, I notice it.
Oh, I do
Things have
too.
not gotten more expensive in the last year and a half, and I've started to notice bigger sales and bigger discounts on things. So I wonder how much of that's going to start seeping into the national consciousness. If you're going to the gas station and it's even 10 or 15 cents cheaper than it was.
Well, I just noticed it this trip to the grocery store, if I'm honest. And I had to sit and think back, pre-pandemic, I was only spending maybe $300, $400 a month on groceries. And, we eat well, right? I have 4 dogs, so, it all calculates. But then in the pandemic, with inflation, I was spending about $1,000 to $1,200 a month on groceries. And I didn't change habits, And last month, I spent $650. So that's a drop, right? Like that's for me, that's a significant drop. I don't know how much, the items that I buy have to do with, with it and as it relates to how prices have dropped, but I've noticed a drop. And of course I've noticed a drop in gasoline too. So
yeah, I just think those little things over time, consumer sentiment is up. Interest rates got cut today. People are going to notice that and maybe refinancing into a lower mortgage.
Right.
I think that there's a lot there that, let's just say, it's still going to be close. But I look at the trend lines and I go, absent some massive explosion in the Middle East or some market crash for some reason, like I can't imagine that the vast majority of people feel like things are getting worse still.
Right.
Things have gotten worse. Things are worse in terms of like overall cost of living than they were a few years ago, but they're improving now. So that's what makes
things get more expensive. I mean, I think that we have to have a reckoning in saying, every few years things get more expensive and the cost of living goes up. That's just the economy. I mean, when when I graduated college in 2013, making $40,000 a year was fine for a single person.
Yeah.
You can't do that anymore.
You can't do that anymore.
Before I married my husband and we conjoined, I love, combined income. Gotta love, but in order for me to live in a comfortable fashion, like a white gay man would like to, I had to make $65,000 to $70,000 a year in Phoenix. Right. And so, I had the ability to do that, but not everyone does. And I think that it does us a disservice that we don't educate people on the economy and that it just goes in waves and things always get more expensive. They just do. That's how it works.
Well, I think Kamala, the campaign has done a fantastic job of highlighting two things: Project 2025 and Trump's economic disaster of lack of a plan. And I think those are very effective. Those are, I mean, if I was going to be called, if they called me out of the blue and said, Chris, what would you do? I'd say focus on the economy, focus on bodily autonomy.
Right.
Those two things are what matter to the vast majority of people. Highlight your economic plan and Trump's lack of it, and point to the fact that the things that he is putting forward either are not something the president can do unilaterally or are not something that would actually lower the cost of living for the average American. He's going to raise tariffs. He's going to raise costs. He's going to cost you $3,000 to $6,000 more a year. And no tax cut he gives you is going to come close to offsetting that because most of it's going to be focused on corporations and the rich. And, I think they've done a fantastic job of highlighting that. It just takes time. What we're seeing right now is, those probably 70% of Americans are just really finally starting to tune in to the presidential race and pay attention to what both sides are saying. And so I really, you can correct me, I'll come back on if I'm wrong in November. I feel like we're going to start to see these polls shifting further and further away from Trump because people really haven't been paying that close attention or watching his rallies or watching his speeches or watching his press conferences. And now they are, and he's just coming more and more and more unglued. Whereas Kamala's steady, she's calm, she's joyful, she has all these things. the question becomes, and I hate to have to say this in the year 2024, but the question becomes, can that presidential quality overcome the fact that she's a woman and she's black in America? So that's what we have to decide. We can get there. We can get there. We just got to make sure that people show up.
So to answer that question, and I'm going to ask Geronimo for his opinion too. When she first announced that she was running, I said, they are not voting for her. I'm going to vote for her, but these people are not going to vote for that black woman. If y'all couldn't get it together to vote for the white woman, y'all definitely ain't getting the fuck together to vote for the black one. I don't care if she is the vice president of the United States. Y'all ain't voting for her. And there's a little bit of me that still feels that y'all are going to say y'all voting for her, and y'all going to go in that booth and do something different. Now that, it's a couple of months, that was July, this is now, we had the DNC convention, and, I'm a little bit more hopeful, but I still think it's going to be close because I still think there are a lot of people that don't want to vote for the black woman.
Oh, it's not going to be close on the popular vote. It's going to be the biggest landslide we've probably seen in a popular vote. It's going to come down to, which again, F the Electoral College. Let's, depending on how this turns out, there may be no better highlight in American history for why the Electoral College needs to die.
Yeah, I've been saying that for a minute, and I think Geronimo has also said we need to abolish the Electoral College.
I've been saying that for the longest. They need to go ahead and get rid of it. It's done. It's antiquated. Kick that shit to the curb.
But Geronimo, how do you feel? How do you think this race is close?
I ain't even going. To be completely honest, I don't. Even with all of the organizing that people have done, and I've been watching, I've been paying attention. Even with everything that has taken place, how suddenly everybody's optimistic, how suddenly everybody's in full force, and it's kind of recharged everybody's gumption for voting. I'm still not sold, and I'll be completely honest with that. Now, is that going to stop me from voting? Absolutely not. But I'll see it. I'll believe it when I see it. That's how I look at it. That's how I looked at it last time. That's how I'm going to look at it this time. Because it's just to me, it's like people can sit there and say things all they want. You can sit there and you can posture excitement for this grand moment all you want. But when it comes down to it and it's time to actually put, the vote down and cast the ballot, will your ballot and your vote casting match that all the posturing you was doing on social media, all the talking you was doing on social media, all the extra, excitement that you claim to have? That's where I'm going to be paying a lot of attention, because to me, even with all of that excitement, there's been a lot of pushback. And I've noticed that, and I'm just not completely sold.
Well, I don't necessarily feel comfortable relying on Gen Z to show up and vote, but
I'm not sold. I'm not sold, and it's just like, it's been time and time again that we have seen that, when it counts and we need people to get in motion, they drag their feet or they disappoint us. You see the amount of people who got upset when we reminded white women that 55% of y'all voted for Trump. Everybody was in arms. Everybody was but it's like you. But it's like you mad. But get your shit together. Get your
right. That's what I say. You need to be mad at yourself, and I think that's what it is. We're experiencing their anger at themselves and their refusal to recognize it.
Absolutely.
They have to look in the mirror and do something else, because don't be coming up in my comment sections getting angry at me because I didn't do it, and neither did my mama or my grandmama. They're going to have to start looking in the mirror and get mad at what looks back at them, because I'm getting sick of it, quite frankly.
I tell them, I say, you need to go tell this to your family. I don't have it,
I tell them straight up, you better talk to Blanche, Dorothy, and Rose, because I ain't talking to me.
Right. Well, and, this might be a whole nother topic, but I get a little, it rubs me the wrong way when white people are telling marginalized communities that they shouldn't vote for Trump. And I understand that's the truth, but why don't you just let us self-police? Quit telling us what we need to do with our lives. You've been doing that.
Right, exactly. Stop the paternalism and redirect that towards your people and your community.
Your own people, your literal sister who you won't talk to because she's a Trump supporter, or your mother, or whatever, like go and tell those people that. Stop taking your anger and aggression towards them out on me.
Right.
Well, don't be mad at Kamala Harris because she was born black. Be mad at Donald Trump because he chose to become orange.
That's it, right? Yeah, that's so true. Oh my god,
turned orange.
And those are the arguments.
If we may, kind of what I think is some things that I think are potentially helpful in reaching those folks who may be on the edge. Some of the things you guys said sort of jogged my thinking on that, in the sense that, like, the number one issue. There are three main issues that Trump supporters cite right now for supporting him. There's the pro-life people. There's the border, people. Let's call them the xenophobes. And then there's the people that see him as a better for the economy, right? The fans of The Apprentice. Let's put them in that category.
Yeah.
So on the first one, the pro-life thing, my question to them is always, in what way is he pro-life? And if they say, well, he got Roe overturned. Well, no, he appointed judges that overturned Roe. What did that overturning of Roe do? It sent it back to the states, right? If Trump was truly pro-life, he would come out and immediately say, if I get elected, I get a majority in Congress and they send me a nationwide ban, I'm signing it. The fact that he isn't saying that tells you two things. Number one, tells you that he knows that's not a popular position. And number two, that he is not himself deeply pro-life at an ideological level.
Well, no, not at all. I mean, I'm sure he's paid for abortions, and we all, everyone in this podcast is old enough to remember when Donald Trump was a Democrat. I remember those days, So yeah, he's a con man who's an opportunist. That's how I view him, and I think the person who's the most like him in politics is Carrie Lake. And maybe I think that because I'm in Arizona and she's just absolutely bonkers, but I've never seen someone stand or just double down like Trump until her. And
and also her background as being a Democrat is.
Yeah. When I got to Phoenix, let me tell y'all, when I got to Phoenix, she was a newscaster who supported Barack Obama, that she practiced Buddhism, and she hung out exclusively with gay people, drag queens at that. You would regularly see her at The Rock in the Melrose, which is the gayborhood, and she's at the drag shows. It wasn't until really her getting fired from Fox and then COVID and her she jumped into the naturalist community here in Arizona, and they're all Trump supporters because they're anti-vaxxers.
Isn't it interesting how often this pattern holds true with J.D. Vance, with Carrie Lake, with Trump himself, with RFK Jr.? They're all people who previously held very liberal, progressive viewpoints. Trump has never been fully progressive, but he at least supported Democrat policies and Democrat politicians.
Right.
But like all of these people, ultimately, when you look at them, you go, oh, they're just opportunists. They're just chameleons that will change to whatever gives them the greatest access to power and influence and money.
Yeah.
It becomes very clear, again, when you back up and you don't look at each person or each situation individually. When you back up and you look at the whole picture, you go, there's a joke in the right-wing influencer space that they're all jilted actors or screenwriters. Almost every single one of them either wanted to be a comedian, an actor, or a screenwriter and couldn't hack it in Hollywood. So they found a niche and they've decided to, and they've been able to cash in.
It's a joke, but there's a lot of truth to that, though. If you look at the
really
big right-wingers, Joe Rogan, and that's not funny. He's not funny.
I think if you look back, before Carrie Lake went off and into the wilderness, or whatever the fuck she did a pretty big she had a big interview with Barack Obama, right? And I think she thought that interview was going to put her on a national stage, and it didn't, right? And so I think that because of that, she didn't see the success that she thought she was going to. And so she just switched sides and switched to what she saw was more financially advantageous. Because let's be real,
Candace,
there's no money in liberal media.
The DNC gatekeep their money and who they allow to platform. So if someone like Geronimo is not getting platformed at CNN or MSNBC, and I think I would be on the fence, they would probably be like, can you not talk about this, but talk about this? And I'm like, whatever I talk about, and however I talk about it, I talk about it. But on the right, the grift is big enough for everybody. And so, Candace Owens did the exact same thing.
Right.
And we're going to have to wrap this up soon, y'all.
Well, Key got knocked out for a second, but we were talking about the three pillars of Trump supporters being pro-life, believing that Trump is better for the economy. And what was the third one? Their brain is shutting down. But
did we say the border?
The border.
Yeah.
And how those are the three things that I think are susceptible to attack. If you can get the pro-life community to understand that Donald Trump is not pro-life, because if he was pro-life, he would be actively pushing for a nationwide abortion ban. Instead, he just wanted to get Roe overturned so he could brag about that and try to play it both ways, right? Try to have like, I gave the pro-life side what they wanted, but I'm fine with it coming down to the states. Well, the pro-life folks are not going to be happy with that because they don't want abortion at all, ever, no exceptions.
Right.
But Trump's not going to go there because at his core, he is not pro-life. He's an opportunist. And when it comes to the border, that's easy. He scuttled the bill that would have dealt with a lot of the issues and has done almost nothing to actually address it. He'll brag about closing the border, but the reality is he was only allowed to do that because the pandemic created a global health emergency that allowed Title 42 to be implemented to temporarily shut down the border.
Correct.
But prior to that, he issued a letter to Congress in 2017 saying, I need you to act on the border because only Congress can do it. And that's knows Biden says Biden could just do it.
Right. Right. And you to piggyback a little bit, and then I'll shut up because I know we're limited on time, but I do think this point's important. You spoke on the border and you related it to people's xenophobia. And yes, that's 100% true. But I feel like if we change the narrative on what the real problems were at the border, because there is a problem at the border, it's not migrants coming in and bringing in crime and drugs. Americans are doing that. More Americans bring in drugs than migrants do. The problem at the border, obviously, is processes, right? And it's more bureaucratic than it is actually presenting real-time problems or real-life problems, should I say, for Americans. And the real problems that it is presenting for Americans is being cast on immigrants when in reality, Americans are causing the problem.
Yeah. And then the third one being the economy, which to me, I know that one's probably the hardest to cut through.
Yeah.
Because if you've been impacted, if your budget has been impacted by the raising costs, Trump gets to tout all these non-falsifiable claims, right? If I were president, we would have never had the inflation that we've had. Well, what would you have done differently?
Right.
Well, we just never would have had it. I call him the don't open until November 6th candidate, right? The envelope that just says, I'm going to fix all your problems, but I'm only going to tell you how after I get elected. Well, bullshit. You promised a ton of stuff during your first term, including having a majority in the House and Senate during your first 2 years. And we never got infrastructure. We never got a replacement for the Affordable Care Act that you promised. You made all of these grandiose promises. You managed to deliver some tax reform that benefited the wealthy primarily, and that wasn't even your idea, that was Paul Ryan's idea. But I think the economic thing is the hardest one to cut through because it's the one that impacts the most people. I can ask somebody who thinks the border is the primary issue, well, have you been personally impacted by that? And most people would say no. But everybody's been impacted by the rising costs of goods and services. We've all had to deal with that. So that's the hardest one. But I think ultimately, if you just go, well, over 100 economists have released a letter saying that Trump's economic plan would be far more devastating than Kamala Harris's, would balloon the deficit. So if you think that he's a fiscal conservative, he's not. So he's not pro-life in the way that most pro-life evangelicals want him to be. He's not actually for fixing the problem at the border, or he would have allowed Congress to do it when they had a plan in place that would have addressed it. And he's not necessarily somebody that actually knows what the fuck he's talking about on the economy. So,
Right.
but that one, I think you've just got to go and say 5.8 trillion deficit added to the deficit in 10 years, balloon the deficit more than any other president in the first 2 years before the pandemic, So those are the areas that I really feel like you can make the most inroads, but it's only, again, pearls before swine. You can only do that for people that are willing to have that conversation. And my experience has been, for the most part, people will let you talk for a while and then they'll shut you down because it's uncomfortable. Anybody who's gone through a deconstruction of any kind knows it hurts. It sucks, because you lose friends, you become dysregulated from your standard mode of thinking about things. You have to do a ton of research and digging into things to try and get to the root of where you went wrong and then make a correction. You have to be humble and willing to listen to people who know about things or are better experts on things than you. Like, that's not an easy thing to do, but I think that if you can push people more towards sit this one out, you don't have to vote for Trump and you don't have to vote for Harris. And then you can have the superiority of saying, well, I didn't vote for her if she screws it up. Or you can sit and watch her do a great job. And then in 2028 go, you know what, actually, I was wrong. I'm going to vote for her this time. So I think there is an opportunity to push people. But, again, as you guys have said, we're a month and a half out. Can you do it before the election? That's the question.
I don't know. I'm a little nervous, but we've come to the end of our time. Christopher, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, anytime. I very much enjoyed it.
And I'm just gonna put that out here. I came in and out this whole recording, so I will get to hear what happened when I edit it because I wasn't here for a lot of it. Thank you to my co-hosts, Ronan and Brandon. I'm Kia Dotson. This has been another episode of I Got a Lot of Things to Say. Catch you later. Bye.